A totally unknown settlement on the Balkan Peninsula will become world famous in a matter of hours. The reason for its fame is the battle known as Captains Beating Generals. The year is 1885. After 500 years, the once mighty Ottoman Empire was in terminal decline. The more developed nationalities within it, Romanians, Greeks, Serbs, and Bulgarians, had recently thrown off the Ottoman shackles and were in the process of achieving independence. As a consequence of the Berlin Treaty agreed between the great powers, a substantial chunk of the Bulgarian nation was left to languish under Ottoman governance in the province of Eastern Rumelia. A new parceling of Europe was underway. The great powers were locked in a merciless struggle to establish spheres of influence and to advance the cause of their favorites. Intrigues and open threats barely skirted the possibility of a new war. Russia won the battle over Bulgaria. The newly liberated principality selected St. Petersburg's favorite, Prince Alexander von Battenberg, as its first ruler. Bulgarian statehood was in its infancy, and the 22-year-old German nobleman was caught in a spiderweb of local and international politics. One thing was certain. The Bulgarians were united in their desire to bring their compatriots in Eastern Rumelia into a new state. It is precisely there that one of the bloodiest revolts in European history had taken place, the 1876 April Uprising. This revolt had set into motion the process that led to the liberation of Bulgaria. The national anthem of the principality was a song that started with "The River Maritsa Roars Bloody." The great powers, more or less favorably inclined towards Bulgarian independence only a few years earlier, were all against unification. The new Russian emperor detested his cousin Alexander Battenberg and certainly did not wish to see him covered in glory. The 29-year-old prince was on the adventure trip of his lifetime. He had considerable military experience, had contested and won the affections of Europe's most desirable aristocratic ladies, but was now up against one of the world's four most powerful empires. Russia expected him to be her de facto representative. However, he was taken by surprise by his new subjects. On the 6th of September, he was in his summer palace of Sandrovo when word came from Plovdiv, the capital of Eastern Rumelia. Today, unification was declared in the name of Your Highness. The government has been toppled. Long may you live. Your faithful subjects, the Provisional Government. The prince was ecstatic and despondent in equal measure, but he did lead his people in their hour of triumph. The National Assembly met for an extraordinary session opened by the Prime Minister Petko Karavelov. MPs unanimously adopted a massive military budget, far greater than a country the size of Bulgaria could afford. The regular 1886 budget was also adopted, just in case. Many were of two minds about the initiative, as they were fully aware that it meant open conflict with Russia. Things were simpler for neighboring Serbia. Bulgaria's expansion was in direct conflict with Serbian interests in the Balkans. Belgrade was secretly supported by the Austro-Hungarians. War seemed unavoidable. But the great powers were not in the mood for an all-out conflict just yet. Instead, Russia and Austria-Hungary used Serbia as their Rottweiler. An international conference was called in Istanbul that tried to settle relations between Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire. It was at this point that the Serbian king Milan started making trouble. He was looking a casus belli at all costs, logically enough, as after unification, Bulgaria had swollen in size to twice the territorial extent of its neighbor Serbia. Serbs had achieved their independence 60 years earlier. Unlike Bulgarians, they had far greater experience of managing statehood. Their army was superior in quality and more numerous in terms of personnel. The newly founded Bulgarian military counted on its Russian command for leadership. However, the Russian officer corps was recalled by Emperor Alexander III, who was furious with his cousin Battenberg. The emperor wished for nothing more than the disappearance of the insubordinate principality. King Milan had foreseen all of this. For his part, Prince Battenberg understood the delicate situation the Serbs were in after the act of Bulgarian unification. He wrote Milan one of the most moving letters ever to be exchanged between royals on the eve of war. Events in Rumelia took me by surprise as much as they did Europe, but I was faced with a fait accompli and could not have done otherwise. I could come to Niš, if that would suit you, and we could thrash out an action plan together. Do not refute our proposals. The moment is decisive, to prove to Europe that we are brothers, and you, like the elder one, are capable of forgiving the younger one his trespasses. I therefore eagerly await your reply. May God watch over you, my dear friend, and gift us a happy future. I kiss you sincerely. Your faithful friend, Sandro. King Milan ordered a few armed sorties across the border. He wanted the Bulgarians to declare war first, so that he would have world public opinion on his side. The two countries exchanged accusations of aggression. The Bulgarian foreign minister wired the Serbian premier. The reply was curt. Bulgaria perpetrated an act of aggression against Serbia. War is inevitable. The two neighboring countries faced a number of moral and legal paradoxes. Their inhabitants spoke similar languages, shared the same religion, and had much history in common. They had fought side by side against the Ottomans. The Serbian command knew this and called for volunteers to join a purported war against the Turks. They said Bulgarians and Serbs would be fighting together. War was declared on the 2nd of November, 1885. 10 hours after the invading troops had crossed into Bulgarian territory. Rumors on either side of the border had it that in the aftermath of Bulgarian unification, the most important goal for King Milan was to occupy the Bulgarian cities of Vidin, Tran, and Kyustendil, cutting his newly enlarged neighbor off from the main routes to Central Europe and the region of Macedonia. In response, the Bulgarians volunteered in droves. Bulgarian students dropped out of universities all over Central Europe and rushed back home. Traveling along the Danube, they sang the recently penned Proud Old Mountain, whose author was one of their own, 22-year-old Tsvetan Radoslavov. 80 years later, it would become the national anthem of Bulgaria. Veterans of the national liberation struggles made for the beeline alongside youngsters. High school students formed volunteer legions. The capital, Sofia, was the gathering point. The commander-in-chief, Prince Battenberg, ordered the army to Slivnica, but there was a glitch. The army was stationed along the Turkish border, hundreds of kilometers to the east. 5 old trains transported the soldiers as far as Belovo, 100-odd kilometers from the front. The distance was covered on foot in record time. The Serbian military was split between 2 formations, Niš and Timok. King Milan himself commanded the Niš army, comprised of 4 divisions, Danubian, Moravian, Drina, Šumadija. The Timok army consisted of a cavalry brigade and 2 infantry regiments led by General Lasanin. Prince Battenberg was Bulgarian commander-in-chief. His forces were divided into a northern group, tasked with defending the town of Vidin and led by Captain Atanas Uzunov, and a detachment tasked with defending the road to Sofia and led by Major Avram Gujev. Gujev split his men in 3. Andrei Blaskov held the center facing Slivnica. Mikhail Savov held the left flank. Anastas Bendorev held the right. All 3 were captains. Macho Petrov was chief of staff. Not one of the Bulgarian commanders was yet 30 years of age. Most were between 24 and 29. The war became a duel between captains and generals, between lieutenants and colonels. November the 2nd. The Niš group of the Serbian army advanced towards Slivnica. The Bulgarian forces at Caribrod engaged the Danubian division. The opponents were of extremely unequal strength, 7-1 in favor of the Serbs. The Bulgarians held their own until 5 in the afternoon and then withdrew. The Serbs, who had been close to encircling them, remained in place to spend the night in Caribrod. November the 3rd. At 10 in the morning, Prince Battenberg traveled from Plovdiv to Sofia together with Prime Minister Karavelov. The Crown Council met at the palace. All agreed that the Serbs must be met at the Slivnica position. Orders were given to defend it to the last man, and that the Western Corps must hold out until relief arrives in the form of the Eastern Corps. 12 regiments remained in place in eastern Rumelia in case the Sultan decided to take advantage of Bulgarian weakness. Shots from nearby Dragoman could be heard in Sofia already. The much-anticipated unification was in danger of unraveling. November the 4th. The defenders of the Dragoman ravine retreated. The Danubian division entered Dragoman, took Kradnovo Peak, and assumed battle order against the Slivnica position. The Šumadija and Moravian divisions battled scattered Bulgarian formations near Tron. The Bulgarians pulled out and the Moravians entered the town. However, the Serbian army did not manage to mass in its entirety at Slivnica. Day 1 of the Battle of Slivnica, November the 5th, 1885. The battle was a huge and fateful event. Slivnica is close to the border. The battle took place between the town, the village of Aldomirovci, and an elevation called Tri Ushi. Once the armies were in place, even a minor positioning misstep would have been fatal. The battle theater was the Tri Ushi Ridge, a 10-kilometer-long elevation in the Western Balkan Range near Sofia. The ridge boasts three peaks, Mekatsarev, Dramski Vrh, and Chavchi Kamek. It was here that the drama of this first Bulgarian war after independence took place. Tri Ushi, 3 ears, 3 acts, 3 days, and 3 nights. Both sides relied on blitzkrieg tactics. The term was not yet in use, but the actual tactics were. The Serbs chose to attack swiftly, the Bulgarians to defend and counterattack with lightning speed. The Serbs enjoyed numerical superiority, 25,000 troops versus 12,000 Bulgarians, and 72 artillery pieces versus 40 for the Bulgarian cannon. However, the Bulgarians enjoyed a strong tactical advantage. The open defensive line was easy to hold. A month earlier, the prince had propitiously ordered it to be reinforced. Ice-cold wind blew over the terrain and pelted everyone with sleet. In the morning, the Bulgarians were ranged as follows. On the extreme right, on the Mekatsarev hill, there was a cavalry squadron and 1 regiment commanded by Bakhchevanov. He had managed to stop the advance of a Serbian cavalry brigade at the Tri Ushi Ridge, took the Golyamo Malovo village, and retained his position. Both sides knew that should Slivnica fall, the road to Sofia was open. The Bulgarian artillery was mainly made by the German manufacturer Krupp and the British Whitworth. Their rifles were Russian-modified US-made Berdana and the Czech-made Krunka. They also had a number of Gatling machine guns. The Serbs had better rifles. They had just acquired modified versions of the very modern German Mauser system that were accurate to a distance of 2 kilometers, and also some of the best carbines of the era, the Peabody Martini. Their artillery, however, consisted of old-fashioned Lahintal and Armstrong models. Both armies suffered from similar logistical problems. The armaments of the Bulgarian army could not be transported to the battlefield fast enough, while the Serbs had moved so quickly that they were short on munitions. It was clear any prolongation of hostilities would lead to greater casualties. The Bulgarian right flank advanced upon the village of Malo Malovo. The young commanders handled the battle surprisingly well. Many of the soldiers were seeing action for the first time. Others had priceless experience during the War of Liberation.
Battenberg commanded his soldiers from the center where the Bulgarian Army HQ was situated. At the critical moment, he personally led the attack. Extremely petulant behavior for sure, but thoroughly understandable given the situation he was in after the withdrawal of the Russian officer corps. His horse, Dusek, was killed under him, and the prince miraculously escaped with his life.
At the day's end, the Serbs had to withdraw. The Bulgarians gained the Chavchi Kamek hilltop. Their success prevented a Serb penetration of the center and left flank at Slivnica. Nevertheless, the prince ordered the prime minister to evacuate the treasury and the palace archive. November the 6th, Day 2. The first reinforcements from southern Bulgaria, 4 infantry regiments and 3 cavalry squadrons, arrived in Slivnica on the evening of the 6th of November. The cavalry units took 2 days to cover the 135-kilometer distance from the town of Septemvri, and the infantry 3. Only Napoleon's armies are known to have moved as quickly in the history of modern warfare, hence the Moncure, the Battle of Fleet Feet. But their brothers on the Slivnica position were as yet unaware of this. Fire exchange went on until late in the night. Fighting spread along the entire Slivnica front on November the 6th. The newly arrived reinforcements were arranged along the entire line. Fighting broke out at the right flank. The Mekatsarev hilltop had been abandoned early in the morning, and Captain Bendarev was ordered to rectify that mistake. He spearheaded a new attack, but the Serbs withdrew before it even began. The hilltop, so important in the defense of the right flank, was taken without a single shot ever being fired. The center successfully repulsed an attack by the Danube Division. The 4th Infantry Pleven Regiment took the credit for this. The situation was much worse on the left flank, which was in danger of being surrounded by the Shumadia and Morava divisions. The Morava division left the town of Bresnik to assist the Danubian, Shumadia, and Drin at Slivnica. A small unit commanded by Stefan Kisov was sent to intercept it. He was given the impossible task of attacking Bresnik and holding off the entire Morava division. Stefan Kisov organized an audacious attack, and the enemy was forced to remain in town until the following day. Only then were they able to move for battle, and even then felt compelled to leave 2 battalions in Bresnik. Early in the morning, Major Kosta Panitsa's detachment attacked the Serbs near the villages of Tudin and Komštica and freed them. The audacity of the Bulgarians caused the enemy to panic. The Serb HQ feared a possible encirclement from the north and strengthened the left flank of the Nishava division. As a result, the Bulgarians strengthened their positions. New detachments of the Eastern Corps arrived at Slivnica, and still the Serbs held the numerical advantage. In order to ensure the capital was impregnable, the Bulgarian HQ formed 2 new detachments tasked with securing the road from Bresnik to Sofia. The Prime Minister sent a letter to the prince with the worrying news that the pro-Russian faction, headed by Dragan Tsankov, was contemplating a coup d'etat. Early on November the 7th, Prince Alexander left for Sofia. He had done all he could to instruct his captains. Now, he had to secure the rear.
The mayor of Slivnica provided transport for food and munitions to reach the front and for wounded soldiers to be brought back to the rear. The school and the church were turned into field hospitals. Shepherd boys brought the soldiers drinking water. Women baked them bread. All locals capable of bearing arms joined the fighting, and the first volunteers fell on the battlefield.
November the 7th, Day 3. The decisive day of the war saw renewed Serbian attacks. 40,000 Serbs were ranged against 32,000 Bulgarians. Major Gujev was entrusted with the overall defense. Intense combat ensued on the right flank. The Serb artillery used their position on top of the Tri Ushi Ridge to bombard the Mekatsarev hilltop, defended by a single mountain battery. In order to prevent it from being taken, Captain Benderev moved 2 detachments from the Plevin and Vidin regiments. The Bulgarians attacked the ridge, and by 11 o'clock took the eastern elevation, Dramski Vrh. The Serbs retreated to the west. Both sides suffered serious casualties. 29-year-old Marin Marinov, who led the assault on Triushi, was mortally wounded. The attack on Triushi received help from the most unexpected quarter. Italian workers on the Tsarigrad-Vakarel railway had volunteered as nurses. At the most critical moment, they grabbed some rifles and entered the fray. Despite their selflessness, the situation was still unenviable. Frightened by the Bulgarian advance, the Serbian HQ reinforced the Danube division with all units from the Drin. The Bulgarian center was forced to push the enemy away from Captain Benderev's position, where, characteristically, the fighting was most intense. The artillery commander, Olympy Panov, seeing his friend was in trouble, he led his troops to his assistance. Benderev had just broken royal orders, and it is safe to assume that the seeds of future trouble between these young braves and the crown were laid right there, on the Slivnica battlefield. The Bulgarian units advanced on both sides of the Slivnica-Dragoman road, and by the evening managed to throw off the Drin to the left, towards the village of Yarlovtsi. The Battle of Triushi raged on the right. Finally, the Danube division could no longer withstand the push and fell back towards the Dragoman Pass. Triushi fell to the Bulgarians. On the left flank too, things were going well for the Bulgarians. HQ wanted to arrest the Moravian division advance on Slivnica. The task was assigned to the newly formed unit led by Hristo Popov. And upon encountering the Serbs at Gurgulyat, gave them a battle despite the usual numerical superiority of the enemy. Not only did they stop the Serbs, but they soundly defeated them. Side by side with the troops fought peasants from the village of Gurgulyat. They won a famous victory. The Moravian division retreated chaotically, and the left flank of the Slivnica position was secure. After a successful attack against positions west of the village of Bratushkovo, the entire left flank moved forwards. By the evening of November the 7th, the Bulgarians had won decisively. The Bulgarians were now in all-out advance. They took Tsarigrad and crossed into Serbia, led by their prince. Then they took the town of Pirot and followed the panicked, retreating Serbs towards the strategically important city of Niš. At this point, the Austro-Hungarian Empire intervened on behalf of the Serbs, and the victorious Bulgarians were forced to halt their advance and retrace their steps back home. But they had every reason to be ecstatic. The plans of the Serbian HQ were in disarray. Sofia was out of harm's way. The enemy had to evacuate Vidin. The newly unified country was safe. Thanks to the quick and decisive victory of the Bulgarians, both sides suffered relatively minor casualties. Bulgarian lost 771 men and 4,232 wounded, whereas the Serbs lost 750 men and had 4,570 wounded. The captains beat the generals for the first and last time. They would not be allowed to achieve more.
After the amazing victory, the Western press dubbed the young prince the hero of Slivnica.
In the end, all was turned upside down. Ordinary Serb soldiers left their homes thinking they were going to war in order to defend the Bulgarians. They were deceived and forced to fight people they considered brothers. Ordinary Bulgarians, too, had no idea why they were fighting their kin, except to defend their homes and families from a very unexpected aggression.
But they would return the Serbs' gesture. In 1887, before the wounds opened by the war had had a chance to heal, the Bulgarians erected a monument and ossuary to the fallen soldiers, Bulgarian and Serb, at Neshkova Mogila in Tsaribrod. One of the last and bloodiest battles was fought near the town because its location, then within the Bulgarian territory, opened up a position threatening the strategically important city of Niš. Six years later, the Italian sculptor Arnoldo Zocchi built a monument in Tron dedicated to the fallen in the fratricidal war. The Bulgarians honored all fallen soldiers, irrespective of the side they'd fought on.
The Bulgarian victory lacked a happy end. Prince Alexander was dethroned. Soon after, those who brought him down in a coup d'etat were executed. They were all, to the last man, heroes of Slivnica. The only man who could amnesty them, their commander-in-chief, was exiled for the rest of his life.
The world has seen many wars, and will no doubt see many more. But there are battles that mean a lot more than winning a war. As if, by divine ordination, they decide the fate of entire nations, sometimes of whole continents. After such battles, nations and continents can never be the same again.